Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. My name is Joey Weaver. He is Mike McDaniel. Mike, first question. If the ACC is winning a national title this year, who's it coming from?
Clemson. Hey, good news, Joey. We found a Clemson contributor.
Woohoo!
Hello.
John McElhaney from SB Nation's Shaking the Southlands joining us. John, what's going on?
Not much. Excited to be back in Clemson. Been missing it. No, actually, I've been here most of the summer, but I'm back. School's about to start. Really excited for football.
John, thanks for joining us, man. This is it's good to have someone on to talk Clemson with us. Obviously, a pretty key, pivotal team for the ACC. Probably the single biggest power on the national stage right now, we'll say. 2017 was kind of a rebuilding year of sorts for Clemson, and yet they ended up in the playoff, and they won the conference and all that. And so they actually bring back an absurd amount of talent going into 2018. Usually when you go on a playoff run, you got to dump a lot of guys off. They leave and go to the NFL. That's not really the case for Clemson. They bring back almost everybody, which is, again, pretty unprecedented. So I want to look at them going into 2018. One of the guys that they do bring back is their quarterback, Kelly Bryant. He was a guy last year who if he didn't lead the team in rushing, he was up there at the very top. He was good, but not explosive passing the ball, we'll say. I mean, he completed, I think, over 70% of his passes in that, but seemed like downfield passing was not really his strong suit. Enter Trevor Lawrence, top quarterback recruit in the country, coming into Clemson this year. And I'm starting to hear some legitimate questions over, is Trevor Lawrence going to overtake Kelly Bryant as a starter? And as much as it seems ridiculous that a starting quarterback that took their team to the playoff could be overtaken by a true freshman, tell me how realistic or unrealistic that is at this point with what you're hearing from the program.
Well, I mean, it seems crazy, but it did happen like halfway through the national championship last year. So there's that. But also, you mentioned it, the downfield passing game is the biggest thing. Clemson fans are really missing it right now. We're used to seeing, long bombs to Sammy Watkins, big breakout plays from Mike Williams, and we just kind of want to see that deep ball back. Last year we were expecting a lot of it with Deon Cain. He was kind of our deep threat, and he just didn't really seem to do much. Whether that was on Kelly Bryant or whether that was on Deon Cain is kind of hard to decide, but, I mean, blame both of them a little bit. That's been the biggest thing out of practice is how great Trevor Lawrence is on the deep ball. It's kind of his bread and butter. They say he's not quite as good at the kind of underneath stuff, the out routes and stuff like that, stuff that Kelly Bryant actually excels at. But the excitement and the explosiveness and the big plays is the biggest thing. That's what's getting people excited. I think his second play in the spring game was a 50-yard touchdown to T. Higgins. So when you have big flashy plays like that, it's kind of hard to convince people that maybe you should stick with the efficient guy that kind of, keeps you the ball, get your offense going. He might not get you the, 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns, but, run to set up the pass and all that stuff. And we're becoming a more run-based team, so that could actually be the goal for them too.
Let's talk about receivers real quick. Deon Cain's gone. Hunter Renfrow, it has been there basically since I was born. He's finally a senior. You have T. Higgins that you just mentioned. Who else? Who else is going to emerge as a receiver in the passing game?
Well, the big name right now, especially because of some videos coming out of practice recently, has been Justin Ross, a freshman out of Alabama. We took him away from Alabama, which was one reason he was already kind of in Clemson fans' minds. But yesterday, the day before, there was a video out of practice where he's getting a back shoulder pass from Trevor Lawrence, and he does a 360 and grabs it with one hand behind his back and then scores a touchdown. And you see something like that, and you just know he's going to be good. A lot of people have been saying he might be even better, stronger in the air than T. Higgins, which is somewhat believable. He's a little bit, sure, he's a little bit thicker. T. Higgins is kind of skinny as a rail, so you expect him to get pushed around a little bit more when he's jumping. But Justin Ross has kind of been the name on everybody's lips, at least outside of the quarterback battle, and Travis Etienne. Other than that, DeAndre Overton, people have been hoping that this is finally his year. He's kind of been the elite guy sitting in the background for a while, and we're hoping that this is the year that he breaks out. As far as underneath stuff, we have Amari Rodgers, who is essentially Artavis Scott cloned. He wears the same number. He seems to be the same size. has the same weird power that you don't really understand where it comes from. And he's just going to do a lot of stuff, not quite the Hunter Renfrow slot stuff, more just the underneath screen routes, kind of the Ray McLeod role. And yeah, as far as tight ends though, we're not really sure where that's going to go. We got a bunch of tight ends battling it out. Milan Richard and Garrett Williams are the big names there. Cannon Smith as well. And we're not really sure who's going to win that battle. Garrett Williams is more of the blocker. He's probably the best blocker we have at the end. But Milan Richard and Cannon Smith do provide some pretty big receiving threats, which is nice.
Especially so, John, yeah, John, if you look at the offense, the biggest hole to fill is probably at that receiver position. If you look at the defense, maybe the only hole to fill is in the secondary. We talked a little bit about Van Smith, Ryan Carter, both leaving, and in particular, the hole is at that safety position. Wanted to see kind of what the thought is there on replacing that and how big of a deal that really is in terms of the defense's overall production this fall.
I do think it's a pretty big deal. We're going to have two, essentially brand new safeties. Tanner Muse has won the field safety job, essentially, it seems, out of practice. He's been around for a little while. He's kind of become a folk hero a little bit for, the underdog guy that everybody likes just because he's kind of been Bullware level crazy. Other than that, we're not really sure who's going to be alongside him. Kayvon Wallace is the leader right now, but there's a lot of guys that could fill that role. And I mean, that's the big thing with the safety or the secondary in general. If you don't have experience, it can get really easy to get burned on big plays. And if they're able to just throw deep bombs on us, our pass rush, even if it's legendary, may not even matter.
Let's talk about the kicking game. So if there's been one weakness, everybody loves talking about the kickers. If there's been one weakness that Clemson's had over the last few years, it's been in the kicking game. Greg Hugel obviously blows out his knee last year in that freak practice accident. That was very weird in the middle of the year.
Yep.
So that goes down. It's basically been kind of a black hole kicker ever since, and Hugel's back now fighting for his job. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, it seems as though Hugel's kind of got his strength back. He got to kick once in the spring game, and it was I can't remember the distance exactly, but it was a pretty good distance. And he had the power. He didn't quite have the accuracy, but it seems like he's been progressing pretty well, and he'll be back to be the kicker this fall. But also he's been facing some extra challenge because Alex Spence has been here for a while. He got to start most of last year after the injury, and he did all right. And then coming in is BT Potter, who has been our kind of I don't really want to call him a 5-star kicker, but he's been a kicker with notoriety, which is a rare thing in a recruit. And he, by all accounts, has been pretty good. So you never know, especially with an injury like that to a kicker. You never really see ACL tears with kickers. You just don't really know what the end result's going to be. Greg Hugel could be just as good or better than he was before, or he could just be a shell of himself. As far as punting, though, we still have Will Spires, which is nice. He's been pretty good, and only looks to get better. He's still pretty young. Hopefully that goes well. And then BT Potter should be the kickoff specialist. By all accounts, he booms kicks all the time. Whether or not he gets redshirted is another question, but with that new redshirt rule, we could see him maybe in the postseason. I've seen that an idea thrown around. Once we get to the ACC championship, then you bring out the kickoff specialist so that no team can ever return against you. So we don't get a Kenyon Drake against us.
John, one of the things that's always been surrounding this team over the last few years is, as the defense in particular has been so dominant, has carried them, is a lot of people asking about the status of Brent Venables. So I guess we get used to this status in college football where a coordinator's at a school for a couple of years, they've got a really good unit, they move up to a bigger school. Once they get to the biggest schools, at some point they're going to move up and be a head coach, right? Chad Morris did that from Clemson most recently, just a few years ago, left and head coach at SMU and now at Arkansas. But so the question has always been there about Brent Venables is, okay, well, when is he going to take a head coaching opportunity? You figure he's got about the best defense in the country year over year. He should be getting an opportunity at some point. But it's also seeming like there isn't a lot of urgency on him to leave Clemson. So I wanted to get your take and kind of your understanding of where this stands, is there anything that Brent Venables would leave for, or is he just totally comfortable and happy doing what he is where he's doing it?
Well, I mean, I think Skeletor's pretty happy just running the defense. You know, I don't want to say insane. I'm not a doctor or anything, but he seems very animated on the sidelines, very loud, very screamy, and he seems to enjoy kind of his role of not really having to care if that looks bad for boosters or outside fans or anything like that. I do think there are some situations he would leave for. Maybe back to Oklahoma if he's still like okay with that. I know Bob Stoops is gone, so I don't know what their relationship was, but that could be a factor in whether or not he goes back over there. And then Kansas State is the obvious draw. He went to Kansas State for part of his college career, coached at Kansas State for a while. Bill Snyder's seemingly ageless, but he is pretty old. And so if he isn't some kind of wizard, he will retire soon. And if they don't hire another Snyder, then he's the obvious go-to guy. But personally, I don't think he'll kind of go with that. He's got everything he could want at Clemson. He doesn't have to deal with outside influences. He can just sit there, run his defense, recruit who he wants, make more than most FBS coaches. He might have to take a pay cut if he ends up at Kansas State. So things like that just make me feel like he's just going to be another Bud Foster that wants to run his defense, and that's it.
I'm a Bud Foster guy, as you can imagine, being a tech grad. Okay, give us one reason why Clemson does not win the ACC, because I'm having trouble finding one.
Lack of explosiveness. That's been a big problem, especially last year. We had a very high success rate according to S&P, but our explosiveness was one of the lowest in the country. We never really seemed to have those big plays. I think we had like one versus Louisville, or two or three versus Louisville, but two of those were like in garbage time. Every once in a while, we'd have a big play from Travis Etienne, and part of the reason he was so exciting was because he was the big play guy. Like nobody else seemed to really have those huge explosive plays on a regular basis that we could count on. So all eyes were on him while everything else was just going in the traditional super efficient way. But you see it kind of bite us in the butt when we get to Alabama and we can't be efficient on offense, and then we have no way of making big plays other than Travis Etienne, so they can just focus on one person.
John, want to look at the team, again, the offense. You mentioned that at wide receiver, there's a couple of holes to fill. One of the things we've been doing in this podcast, with these previews, is trying to identify a new name to know. Someone who wasn't really a huge contributor in the past for Clemson, but by the end of the season, a lot of people will know their names. So a good example last year would have been Travis Etienne. Doesn't have to be a freshman, but it very well could be. Is there any one person, one name on offense that is a new name to know for folks watching Clemson later this year?
Well, I mean, I could be an obvious person and just say Trevor Lawrence because he, is a freshman. But I think I'm going to stick with Justin Ross. He's been, by all accounts, amazing. Another freshman to go for would probably be Lynn J. Dixon, who's kind of a running back. It's kind of blurry what he actually is, but he's mostly a running back. He could be pretty good, but I mean, it's kind of hard to find a name that you would say would stick out because we just don't have that many new faces. Other than on the offensive line, we have a couple new offensive linemen. Maybe Jackson Carman, the top 10 recruit out of Ohio, ends up playing, but I don't think he's going to. It's kind of, we have Mitch Hyatt, who has started his whole career, but somebody like that is pretty rare in college football. Offensive linemen usually take a couple years. So there's not a ton of new faces other than the big obvious ones like Trevor Lawrence. So expect a lot of people
I'm assuming it's pretty much the same on defense. I guess you can pick out a name in the secondary.
Yeah, you probably pick out a name in the secondary. Tanner Muse, even if he's not the best player we have on defense, is probably one of the more visible players we have on defense, kind of like I said earlier, like Ben Boulware was. He makes those big flashy plays. Like I think there was a garbage time play. I can't even remember who it was against, but he caught an interception off a tip and then ran it all the way back. And the crowd went crazy, and he was dancing and going crazy. And I mean, people have just loved him ever since. And now we get to see him as a full-time starter. So I'm pretty interested to see how it goes. He's kind of that hard hitter, but also manages to find the ball every once in a while. So hopefully that scales up with increased playing time.
John, with the other previews we've done so far, what we've done looking at the schedule is look at, games that we consider surefire wins, surefire losses, and toss-ups. I don't know that really applies to Clemson this year. If you look at the S&P Plus numbers, and the projections and all this, Clemson is given at least an 80% chance to win 10 of their 12 games, which is unbelievable. And I think the lowest probability is a late road game at Florida State, which has a 73% win chance. So instead of talking about it in those terms we've done with other teams, I think we got to change it up a little bit here. Let's look at this schedule and try to find a couple of primary trip-up games. If we just assume that Clemson's going to lose one or two games, what are those games that you're the most scared of based on where they fit in the schedule and various other factors?
Well, myself as a very pessimistic Clemson fan, I see at Georgia Tech versus NC State, at Florida State, and versus Louisville as like death trap games, even if most of those teams may get a little bit worse from last year. NC State losing their entire defensive line, Louisville losing Lamar Jackson, Florida State changing pretty much everything with a new head coach and everything. Georgia Tech in Atlanta always scares me. I know that would probably make you happy to hear. I have so many nightmares of us wanting to go into Atlanta and have a big win, a statement win for us, and then it just comes crashing down on us. I feel like that could happen again this year, especially with facing an option team. But Brent Venables has been kind of showing that he kind of has figured out the triple option. So gives me a little bit more confidence. At Florida State does scare me because I feel like there's a chance they could be quite good. I don't really know how that Gulf Coast offense is going to work out. It could be amazing. So you never really know what Florida State's going to be. And then Louisville, I do think they're a little bit more dangerous than most people have been putting on. I feel like a lot of people have written them off because they don't have Lamar Jackson anymore. But I feel like their backup is quite good. I know he's a 4-star recruit. His name's escaping me right now. So if he ends up being a pretty good quarterback, I know that Bobby Petrino can work with that. So Louisville could end up being another thriller that we've had 3 out of the last 4 years.
We just recorded a podcast actually previewing Louisville, and it's kind of been the same reaction for Jawan Pass. It's been
that's
okay. Well, he's replacing Lamar Jackson, and things might be a little bit different now that Jackson's no longer in the fold and he's like a generational type player at quarterback. But by the same token, like Jawan Pass is more of the stereotypical, prototypical pocket passer.
Right.
A guy that Bobby Petrino is used to. So that a lot of people are writing Louisville off. I think Joey and I both predicted 7-5 for them. We think they're just going to take a step back, just be relatively average, but that could be a trap game. One game you didn't mention that I think would get interesting is at Boston College, because Boston College just isn't scared of anybody, and their defense is always good. And I feel like this is the best offense they've had in quite some time. And they're a real smash mouth team that I feel like getting that game on the road in Chestnut Hill late in the year is one of those games that definitely could get weird.
Yeah, it definitely fits into that paradigm of Clemson losing a game late, right, like 2 weeks before the end of the season. So that one does scare me. I didn't even realize that it was at Boston College. I misread the schedule that I was looking at. So yeah, that does kind of up the fear factor for me, especially with A.J. Dillon kind of revitalizing the BC offense all of a sudden, going from 0 to 100 in about one game. So that is pretty scary. I mean, imagine that BC offense with one of the Don Brown defenses that they had the last few years before he went to Michigan, and you're looking at another contender in the ACC. So there is a good chance that Boston College comes back to the Boston College of old.
How do Clemson fans, Joey? Just one more. I'm sorry. How do Clemson fans feel about that Texas A&M game, like second game of the year overall?
I feel like we're really excited in general. I don't know if the fan base in general is as sure that we're going to win as a lot of the numbers say we are. A lot of that has to do with kind of our fear of Jimbo Fisher. You know, he has in the past absolutely ruined some of our best teams. And you never really know with somebody like that. Texas A&M really committed to him. But then again, on the other hand, people look at it and you see he's got the extremely complex offense. He's going to a new place. Texas A&M, it wasn't like they were a top 10 team last year. So there is a lot of rebuilding to do, and there's a reason that the numbers say that we're about a 75% chance of winning that game. But I feel like there's a little bit less confidence in Clemson fans just because it's a week 2 game on the road. We don't know who the quarterback's going to be. We don't know how the secondary is going to gel. At least we have that game against Kent State. It's not a week 1 opening game where you're trying to decide who's going to be the quarterback, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, while playing a really quality opponent. So at least we have that one game to kind of get our feet under us. But there is a good bit of fear that becomes one of the trip-up games.
That was actually the game I was going to bring up. I was going to say, I think if we were talking about this as the 2019 schedule, I'd be a little more nervous than 2018. Week 2, 2018, it's just Jimbo's got a really good staff there and a really good system he's going to run on offense and all this stuff. But it's complicated enough that you're right, John. It's going to take a little bit of time. And so I don't think that they're quite as dangerous. I'm also, as a Georgia Tech fan, I'm pretty out on them having any sort of chance against Clemson, at least while their defensive line is what it is and performs how it has been, for the last few years. Like that is not a defensive front that Georgia Tech's going to be able to operate against. I'm more worried about Georgia Tech getting shut out than I am about them just winning the game outright, for what that's worth. Syracuse, the game that Clemson lost last year, I think that's a get-back game. Get that at home. That should be a comfortable win.
Yeah, that's been the big thing for me is I feel like that one's going to have a little bit of a revenge factor to it.
Yeah,
that home game.
Yeah, that might be one of those 4-touchdown cruising wins. Get the walk-ins in the game. That whole thing.
Get Kelly Bryant some playing time.
Yeah. Get the backup in the game there. The games that stick out to me, you guys mentioned at Florida State, at Boston College. Those are 2. Louisville actually is kind of a trap game now that you mention it. That could get a little bit weird just, late in the year, coming off a Florida State game, all that. So I'll give you that one as well. And then maybe I'll just throw out there the South Carolina game too. It is a home game, and I don't know how good South Carolina will be, but it's a rivalry game. So some would say you just got to throw the records out in those games. So we'll have to see. But I'm struggling. If you tell me that they're going to go 11-1, I got to pick the one loss. I'm kind of struggling to figure out exactly who that would be.
Yeah, and naturally I have to completely disagree on the South Carolina game, especially because the last few years it seems like we've been intentionally trying to kind of hurt them a little, not injure them, but kind of down their spirits. We beat them 56-7 2 years ago. They had this whole mantra of never again, we're never going to lose like that again. And then at one point in the game this year, it was 30-something-0 before they scored. So it feels like they've been trying to be a little bit more cruel to South Carolina, and that being a home game, especially right before the ACC championship, I feel like we'll probably get up for that one.
Fair enough. Record prediction, John?
I mean, I want to be the jerk that just says 12-0, but I play it safe and I'll go 11-1. Try and be modest.
What game are you most afraid of? We listed a handful. What's the one that you're most afraid of?
Probably at Florida State. I'm really interested in what Willie Taggart is doing, and I think Cam Akers should be on a Heisman list. I don't judge that as being the best player purely, but I feel like he's one of those players that could make or break a game, kind of like Dalvin Cook.
They're the closest thing on this schedule to matching talent to Clemson. So that's probably the obvious go-to answer if you got to pick one.
Plus, their defensive line looks like it's going to be a lot better. They had a little bit of a down year last year. I mean, the whole team in general had a bit of a down year last year. But Brian Burns kind of scares me. So I feel like they'll be able to get up for that game, especially it being in Tallahassee, and Florida State's always going to have the talent to match up with anyone. So as long as they get the scheme right, I feel like they could actually contend with Clemson for the ACC Atlantic crown.
Fair. Joey, what do you got?
I'm with John. I'm at 11-1. I have a hard time predicting anybody to go 12-0, and it almost doesn't matter how good of a team you are. You're in college football. You are bound to have a screw up or a weird injury at the wrong time. I think they're going to drop one. I don't know which one it would be. Florida State is as good a contender for that as any. Another one that sticks out to me a little bit that I don't have any good reason to say this other than like some recent history in this series is the week before Florida State at home against NC State coming off a bye week.
Yep.
Last time NC State was at Death Valley, they should have won the game if they didn't yank a field goal at the buzzer. That game goes to overtime and Clemson wins, or I can't remember if that was a 1-point loss or.
It went to overtime. I was lucky enough to be on the goal line because they missed the field goal. We go to overtime, we score, and then we intercepted it on I think the second play of their overtime. And then last year, it literally came down to a false start by one of their wide receivers. One of their wide receivers just jumped early on the play that would have been the game, at least giving them the lead very late in the game touchdown. And I mean, they easily could have won that game last year. That game last year really stressed me out. And with Ryan Finley coming back at quarterback, I feel like they could still be pretty dangerous. I don't think we're going to 41-0 them like we did, I think in 2014 or 2015.
Well, and I think the talent gap between those two teams is way more significant in 2018 than it has been the last couple of years. But I mean, somehow Dave Doran struggles in some strange games, but doesn't struggle against Clemson. I don't know how, but you got to keep an eye on that. So, long story short, I'm going 11-1 as well. Mike, are you calling them shooting the moon here?
I am 12-0.
Ooh, spicy.
Going for it. So Clemson has dropped one in each of the last couple of seasons. One that they definitely shouldn't have lost. I wouldn't even say they really got outplayed in the Pitt game. That was just a down game by the defense. It was back and forth. It was shootouty. It's tough. It was shootouty.
Yeah.
Last year they definitely got outplayed in the Syracuse game. I know that Joey and I have talked about it with the Kelly Bryant injury, and he wasn't 100% in that game, and then he was knocked out early. But they were struggling before Kelly Bryant left the game. So they just kind of got outplayed on a Friday night in a weird environment. So that you're going to have one of those. This team is way too talented. I know there are some issues in the secondary, but they have essentially two entire starting units on the defensive line. Linebacking core should be pretty strong. They have playmakers all over the field on offense, even though some of them might be young. You essentially have two quarterbacks who can start pretty much anywhere in the country at quarterback. So I'm going with 12-0. I think 11-1 is a really safe answer. I don't like safe answers on this podcast. I'm going with 12-0.
Yeah, we're those teachers that never give hundreds.
Yes, that's totally fair. But even at 11-1, this team's going to a college football playoff. I don't think there's anybody in the ACC, even looking at like Miami, and even if you drop the Florida State game, like, is Florida State going to lose another game on their schedule? Yeah, probably. So like, I don't know. I have trouble seeing Clemson not making it to the ACC championship and then not beating the team that represents the Coastal Division. Miami's going to be good. They're not on Clemson's level yet. So even with them being back, maybe, like, I don't see them competing with Clemson on the same field. I think we might have another incident like we had last year's ACC championship game.
Yeah, that stunned me. Even now, I'm still kind of surprised that we beat them so thoroughly in the ACC championship. I thought it would be a lot closer than it was.
One thing I just wanted to point out, too, is that if Clemson does go 12-0 here and finish the season undefeated, especially going through a playoff or whatever, it would be only the second time that Clemson's finished the season undefeated since Frank Howard's 1950 Clemson team. They finished undefeated in 81 to win the national title, and they haven't gone undefeated other than that in the last 70 years or so. So yeah. Clemson seems generally bound to lose one at some point or other. It's just more a matter of when. But hey, I mean, if there's a team with the talent and the schedule and all that to get it done, it's probably Clemson. John, thank you for coming on. This has been a great preview for what should be another exciting season for Clemson fans everywhere. Appreciate you coming on to preview them with us. Tell the people where they can find your work.
I do all of the social media for Shaking the Southland at ST Southland on Twitter. I really enjoy doing all that. The community's great. Twitter's fun in general. And then shakingthesouthland.com is the website for our blog. We're about to start our season preview in the next couple weeks. It's really exciting. We're gonna have like a pseudo like D-line section because there's just so much to talk about. And then for me personally, you can follow me on Twitter at Juan Fabulous, JUAN Fabulous. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on, man. You're welcome back anytime. It's been a great preview, and we'd love to have you at some point later this season if you're available.
Awesome.
Thanks, John.
All right, Mike. That's John McElhaney. Again, shakingthesouthland.com. He is their social media guru, the tweet czar, as it were, over at Shaking the Southland. So go check him out there. We got some other teams to preview, but in the meantime, they can find us on Twitter. I am at FTRS Joey. He is at Mike McDaniel CFB, and together we're at BC Podcast ACC. And once again, he is at Juan Fabulous on Twitter, and that's a great Twitter handle, by the way. Big fan.
Thank you.
Big fan. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, the Overcast app, wherever fine podcasts are sold for free. Y'all can send us an email to the longest email address known to man, basketballconferencepodcast@gmail.com.
Nailed it.
Mike, tell them where else they can find us on the social medias.
Facebook.com/basketballconference. Rate, review, find all of our podcasts there. Rate our podcast on iTunes and review it. Make sure you guys go out and do that. Please
do. You would be much appreciated if you did. Mike, they can also find us on YouTube. You just go search for Basketball Conference. We've got all these published up there, so go check those out. You can see John's very clean and plain room that he just moved into. So it's
real nice. Enjoy all the art I have on my walls. It's really, really popping.
That one, I believe that piece is called Fire Detector or Smoke Detector or something like that.
I have one scarf and an Alabama flag, but that's just because I'm from Alabama.
There you go. You're going to make a lot of friends with that flag around there.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, that wraps it up. We'll be back soon to preview some more teams. But until then, for Mr. Mike McDaniel and Mr. John McElhaney, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. And until then, go ACC.